IVM.
The nominations for the 2017 Kim Jong Awards for stupid economic ideas are
The Supreme Court for not allowing Indians to buy alcohol near a highway.
The Government of India deciding that the stent in your heart cannot cost more than 29,600 rupees.
The South Delhi Municipal Corporation for nationalizing the city's toilets.
And the Government of West Bengal for deciding how much a doctor can charge you for saving your life.
Welcome to this special episode of the Pragati Podcast, where we will be discussing terrible economic ideas that refuse to die in 2017.
The Pragati Podcast is a weekly talk show on economics, public policy, and international affairs.
We are your hosts, Hamsini Hariharan
and Pavan Srinath. If you look at the nighttime satellite images of the world and zoom over the Korean peninsula, you'll see something amazing. Below a line, everything is lit up like fairy lights. Cities, towns, highways, roads, everything is alive with light at night. All of this is South Korea. Just above the line is the darkness of North Korea.
Pursuing terrible economic policies, Kim Jong-un, his father Kim Jong-il, and his grandfather Kim Il-sung ensured that millions of North Koreans stayed in abject poverty and hunger, suffered famines, have no access to basic human needs, and even today have little hope in sight.
Along with a thirst for absolute power, the Kims used bad economic ideas with a heavy role for the government in everything, no rule of law, and no economic freedoms. You may think that bad economic ideas in India, they don't push us to North Korean levels of misery, but these ideas will not help us reach South Korean levels of prosperity either.
Anupam Manur is joining us to nominate the worst economic ideas that came into force, or those that came close. Welcome to the show, Anupam.
Thanks, folks. It's a bittersweet feeling to be here. Bad economic ideas are like chronic infections that just don't go away. They have infected Indian society as a whole. And it isn't just the government of India which can pursue terrible ideas. State governments and city governments do their own part. The Supreme Courts and the High Courts and municipal courts are no better either. And sometimes what the citizens demand is often worse.
Just a note, we are confining ourselves today on this show to stupid economic ideas that were in action in 2017 or came close. Even today, there are evergreen ideas from the past that still affect every walk of our life. Prohibition is this idea that never quite goes away. Banks are still nationalized and run by the government. Air India still exists. And some of our taxes still go towards keeping it alive.
But before we get into all of that, Pavan, what about the categories of these awards? There are still some big bad economic ideas that the government has never managed to rid itself of, right?
Right. So let's go idea by idea. And let's see how many offenses are committed in each of these ideas in 2017. And how many nominees have been created for the Kim Jong Awards.
All right. So Anupam, what would the first category be in the Kim Jong Awards?
Let's start with the biggest sort of mistakes that a government can make, where it believes that it has some sort of power over the markets and power over human actions. So we'll start off with something big, which is bans.
And bans are always bad, like you have told us so multiple times this last year.
Yeah. Bans have never worked in the history of human society, and it is surprising that governments still pursue it. Firstly, with a ban, you'd have underground markets that come up because as long as there is a demand for any product, there will be a supply for that product. So bans just don't work. But what you do is increase crime in society, you derail economic freedom for people, and you end up creating criminals, you end up creating moral order which ends up doing more harm to society than good.
So in the aim of controlling something, the government actually loses control when it bans something, right? So, for example, if you say that alcohol shall no longer be produced or sold in my city or in my state, you lose the control that you have over alcohol, right? If it is regulated, if it's managed by the government in some way, in the right way, then you can at least control that the alcohol stays safe. and you can even tax some of it and use that tax money for other things. All of those benefits go away when you decide to ban something, right?
Since you mentioned that example, I think we should start with our first nomination, which happened late last year, actually, 2016, but I want to sneak it in here,
All right.
which is the prohibition in Bihar, because the effects were seen in this year. So Bihar in late 2016 did prohibition on the sale, distribution, consumption of alcohol, and the effect was seen this year. So as you rightly said, you had, because of the ban of alcohol legally, you had people resorting to illegal means, which is usually producing alcohol in non-scientific manner, without proper production processes and so on, and which is what you end up with, spurious alcohol. And we know what happens with that.
The old mental image of moonshine is somebody puts like a piece of rubber tire inside, battery acids, cook all kinds of things, and finally there's some concoction that's made that can...
Basically anything that can completely kill your brain cells.
All right.
So what happens with that is your huge tragedy. Every single time there's a ban on alcohol, you invariably get huge tragedies. A lot of people consume spurious alcohol and they end up dying. So that is your first nomination. And some of the other funny stuff that happened this time, as a side note, is that because alcohol was banned and they didn't think through what sorts of alcohol to ban, but they put up a blanket ban. Some of the essential ingredients for laboratory testing and especially TB diagnosis required ethyl alcohol, but there was so much pressure on ethyl alcohol that there was a massive shortage of it. So patients in Bihar couldn't do TB diagnosis.
I can see why this is one of the nominees.
The obvious inspiration for the Kim Jong Awards are the Darwin Awards. And Darwin Awards are sometimes funny, most of the times horrific, because there are people doing stupid things and selecting themselves out of the gene pool. What makes the Kim Jong Awards here worse is the result of these bad economic ideas is not the people who are proposing these ideas who get hurt, but innocent people and the general public who get affected. So the Darwin Awards at least affect the individual, right?
There's massive social harm done in all of these cases. As you shall see, the recurrent theme with the Kim Jong Awards is that there's massive social harm being done and serious social harm, including deaths and fatality, right?
Right. And even when that is not happening, it's not that we should ignore it. Even if it leads to loss of economic activity, distortion of markets, the effect is more diffuse. Nobody necessarily loses their lives, but ultimately a lot of money and wealth is lost, and India remains a poor country.
They can lose their jobs, they can lose their income, and which can have really dire consequences as we go on.
Okay. Anupam, can you tell us the second nominee under bans?
Since we are on the topic of alcohol, I'm going to stick with the recurrent theme here. And this time, it is the Supreme Court of India, which decided that it shall put a ban on the sale of alcohol on all our highways.
And what was the motivation for this ban?
The Supreme Court felt that people would go while driving to a bar or a pub on a highway and end up drinking and driving.
Yeah, but...
So there is a genuine problem in India that we have a high toll of accidents. We are one of the most accident-prone countries in the world, when it especially comes to vehicular accidents. And alcohol does play a role in a decent number of these accidents. But the Supreme Court decided to go from a genuine problem to a stupid solution.
Exactly. And it isn't tough to imagine people buying alcohol. If they really are intent on drunken driving, then it's not hard to imagine them stocking up on alcohol and drinking on the way.
And this led to a whole host of other problems, right? Like central roads in Bangalore, for example, had to shut down many bars and pubs because these were still notified as national and state highways.
Yeah, for some reason they had not been denotified as a local road, even though the local governments and the state governments were spending money to maintain the local roads. So the MG road and remaining areas in the middle of Bangalore were highways. So most of the city center was within 500 meters of that highway.
And that's still a huge loss of economic activity in that area.
Yeah, for nearly 3 months you had pubs and all sorts of nightlife which came completely to a halt in the center of the city. So that led to significant loss of economic activity.
And in other places, other weird things happened. In Rajasthan, I think all the roads got denotified and made into local roads. So
Even the highways.
even the highways.
Genuine highways.
So, which is this bizarre exercise where government officials are wasting time and effort to circumvent a stupid idea by doing other stupid things. So it's like a vicious cycle of stupidity, right?
Yeah, and it is 500 meters not as the crow flies, but measured in terms of the road. So I think all of us have seen that really genius bar in Kerala, which made 500 meters worth of road within this thing, which went around in circles up to the entrance of the bar. So, and he was allowed to remain open.
Fair enough. All right. What else? Bring on the other nominations.
All right. So this is a thing that happened quite recently. Delhi's ban on firecrackers in order to cut down the pollution and smog in Delhi. Again, genuine problem of pollution in Delhi. Firecrackers during Diwali add to it because of the cold, and it adds to the smog. And it's a genuine public health crisis. But again, bans are not the solution.
All right. Can you explain that more? Because you would think that this is something that's genuinely helping with all the problems that you mentioned before. What would the alternative be?
I think let's just take an instance of what happened. Certain groups decided that this was infringing upon their right to freedom and so on, right to freedom of religion. So they deliberately went ahead, purchased large amounts of crackers and burst just to go against it. So you end up with such result with the ban. But as I think our colleague Nitin Pai says, public policy is not about absolute on and off switches. It's tuner knobs. So you could increase taxes on the firecrackers, for example, to start off with. Instead of doing a complete ban, you can have designated areas for bursting firecrackers, perhaps. There are many other solutions than a complete ban.
Fair enough.
And also, you can't do this a week or two before Diwali hits. Right? I mean, Delhi's pollution problems have been well known for a while. So once the crackers have been made, they have been distributed, there are people in the supply chain who have bought it and sold it, and now they're either at the gates of Delhi or within Delhi about to sell it, and you decide, okay, in infinite wisdom, we will ban this. A lot of people will get angry, a lot of people will lose money, and in any case, it's easy to announce a ban. Very hard to actually enforce something. And in this case, we saw little or no enforcement. Hamsini, this is not quite an official ban, but Mr. Nitin Gadkari, our Union Minister for road transport and highways, made an announcement back in July saying that driverless cars will not be allowed in India so that we can save the jobs of drivers.
Oh my God.
So it's a ban even before its existence.
Yes. So what this means, so this is when bans have, I think, troubling economic consequences, right? And this is when people are trying to be protectionist. So bans in the context of jobs. What you want in India is if Uber or Mercedes-Benz or whoever is experimenting with driverless cars worldwide, you want them to come and do that work in India, right? You want India to be an early technology adopter. And once that happens, there are all kinds of other jobs that can be opened up. First of all, these new driver jobs that have been opened today are because of the adoption of technology, right? Because Uber and Ola and others came in, that you had these new jobs being created. But here you want to kill innovation, you want to sort of stifle the opportunity for advances in the country. And you're doing this by striking a little bit of fear and uncertainty. That's enough. You don't need to formally ban anything. But if people are afraid that you may ban a year from now, they won't do anything. They won't invest.
Even an inane comment such as this sets the norm. And thus, as you rightly said, why would anyone want to invest in driverless technology here in India now?
You guys, the bans that you've mentioned are, I'm sure, important and stupid of all things. But there is one that takes the stake.
You mean take the cake?
No, I mean take the stake, Pavan. The cattle slaughter ban this year, of course.
Yeah, I mean, we all know this, but India has more cows and buffaloes than any other country in the world. Like we do a human census every 10 years, we do a cattle census in this country. And not allowing people who own cattle the freedom to be able to sell that cattle for meat at the end of the day, at the end of its life, at whenever they want to, ruins the entire cattle economy. We'll have less cows in the country. People will not want to keep cows if you're not allowing people to use the meat of those cows. So what you're doing, I think what we have in India is a big hodgepodge, right? Even when the fathers and mothers of the country were framing the constitution, they kicked this bucket down the road by putting this cow slaughter ban in something called the directive principles of state policy. And today we have a hodgepodge of laws around all of these things. In some states, you can't slaughter these animals. That part is banned. In some states, the sale is banned. In some states, the sale
is regulated, right?
Regulated in some ways. In some places, buffaloes are okay, but cows are not okay.
Oh, and then in some other places, you can't set up cattle markets near the border or something like that.
Yeah, because then there is this scare that the meat might be smuggled across the state border. So we have this entire customs and regulatory system on cattle. And turns out beef is one of the cheapest sources of meat and protein that is available. So when India is as poor as it is, if you deny people a good source of protein, and we all know now that proteins are good, carbs not so much, you are actually denying people nutrition.
And I will have to go back to an earlier point, which is even if you ban it, people will still do it. But what you do lose is the ability to regulate it. So if all of this is done in order to prevent cruelty to cows and other forms of cattle.
You're a vegetarian, right?
I'm a vegetarian, and I'm still arguing for, removing all sorts of bans on, cow slaughter. Because if you really care about animals, then you should have economic freedom such that you can regulate it. Then you can specify how the cattle should be killed, what kind of cages should be kept in, what kind of, places, how they should be reared. You can set these rules if prevention of cruelty is truly your motivation.
But Hamsini, going back, I don't know if there are genuine nomination for 2017 because this problem has been around for quite a while before, right?
Yeah, it all kicked off in 2017 because in UP, you had the UP government, which basically identified a lot of slaughterhouses which were working without required permit and licenses. And it was found that they had slaughtering and selling meat of cows. This led to the then chief minister, who issued a statement saying it truly hurts him and that they're going to do a crackdown on all such illegal slaughterhouses.
Right, but in India, any business of any kind is illegal if the government determines that it's illegal. Right?
Absolutely. I mean, there's endless amounts of conflicting licenses you have to get and compliances that you have to do, which means no single business in India is 100% legal.
And those were the worst ideas of bans that took place in 2017 that truly deserve the Kim Jong Awards this year. But let's move on to the second category, price controls.
Yes, price controls are this set of ideas where the government decides in its infinite wisdom to set what you can buy and sell and at what price.
It's the false sense of control that you get with price controls, which makes it really popular among rulers. And the funny thing is that with any price control, you do see that control in the first few months until all the brewings that happen underneath will just erupt and finally completely distorts and destroys the market. So with pretty much like bans, you'll have an underground market forming. First, you'll have shortages of any good that has a price control on it. In order to beat that shortage, you'll have an underground market which forms. And then you'll have all sorts of funny, unexpected, unintended consequences depending on the market and the product.
And sometimes these consequences are not so funny.
Well, most of the times they're not funny, but it's worthy of the Kim Jong Awards, and anything related to Kim Jong is funny.
Okay.
All right, can you give me the nominations for this category?
Okay, let's start with quite a serious one. The union government, in a stroke of compassion, decided to put a price cap on stents, coronary stents.
Stroke of compassion. I see what you did there, Anupam.
So, coronary stents are basically little mesh tubes which ensure that your blood vessels stay open to a minimum amount. So because of cholesterol, because of clots, because of whatever else, you can have your blood vessels really shrinking, and especially the blood vessels that feed the heart, right? That allow the heart to keep pumping. So you need stents to go in there and stop this from happening.
And stents are very expensive, I'm guessing. Is that why the
Yeah,
government banned them?
so old generation of stents were simple metal meshes. So they were just there. Higher quality ones were those that could last longer, not give you any trouble, could be more easily inserted and so on. But then they realized that, hey, if you're actually putting something foreign inside there, can you also coat it with a few drugs and a few other things that slowly they emit, or some drugs and things dissolve into the blood from there. So this is an area, medical devices are something where you have constant innovation that is happening. The kind of medical care that you can imagine 20, 30 years from now is in the realms of science fiction, right? But all of that is possible. But the government decides to use Alauddin Khilji level policies to govern these stents, right?
So what they did, due to perhaps the lack of understanding of all the innovations that has taken place in this particular field, is that they decided that there's going to be two categories of stents, right? One, a low-cost stent, which is a basic metal mesh at 7,000 rupees would be the maximum price. And a drug-eluting stent would be capped at 29,600 rupees. Right? Whereas they would originally cost something like 15,000 and about 1,21,000 respectively. So it was nearly a 50% or more reduction in the prices.
And what was the effect of this price control? I'm guessing that the manufacturers of stents did not take it very well.
Of course not. There were three big American companies that decided to withdraw their stents. Medtronic's, Abbott Medicals and another company. They decided to withdraw the stents from the market, the higher variety, higher end stents from the market. And this is the funny thing, right? The government didn't stop there. It issued an order saying that it is illegal for you to withdraw your stent from the market, and somehow thought that that would work.
Yeah, in the past, the government has nationalized private entities within the country, right? But sometimes their ambition grows too high. You can't nationalize a foreign company.
Exactly.
And what it's effectively done is that it's made sure that people don't have access to good quality stents anymore, right?
Exactly. Already you have all these companies who have quite openly declared that they're not going to introduce their latest innovations in the country. So we are always going to lag behind most other countries in terms of, for stents. And what's also happening is that now Indian market is being flooded by cheaper variety of stents that comes from China instead of the high-end and really, sophisticated stents that we were getting from the US and Europe. So you're already seeing that even those consumers who are willing to pay more, who want good quality stents, are now being deprived of that opportunity.
So markets are interesting in that they find ugly solutions to artificial problems sometimes. So you can have these stent companies striking deals with certain hospitals where the hospitals will raise the cost of their rooms in order to cross-subsidize the stents and have some system of payments. So this is really avoidable, and it is not going to give you a good solution either. So the ban won't work, the price caps won't work, and you're just making everything messier.
Within 2 months, India Today, I think, had a report on how the cost of surgery for angioplasty and so on increased by more than 3 times in most private hospitals. And this is directly telling you that it's not that doctors started charging more for their services overnight, but it is to compensate for the price caps on stents. And then they issued a directive saying that you can't do that either. So you know where this is going.
The government, in a fit of compassion, does this over and over again, right? For example, I think they fixed the price of about 750 essential drugs recently, and you have the same effects that then repeat themselves in pharmaceutical.
Absolutely. I mean, the government has set the prices for cancer drugs, for example, so that cancer patients get cheaper medicines or accessible to cheaper medicines. But then you'll have essential cancer drugs just going out of the market. So,
and remember, something like cancer, you always need to test the drugs for each population group. For example, Indians who have, say, breast cancer or pancreatic cancer might have different mutations that are more common in the Indian gene pool versus what's happening in the US. So even if a successful drug has been made there, you want someone to spend the money to do large phase 3 clinical trials. These things cost a ton of money. You want thousands of patients in them. You want robustness, you want statistical validity. Which company wants to invest in it if you're saying at the end of it, sell it for like 15 rupees a pill?
So what you're saying essentially is that the quality of our medical care is going down because of all these price controls.
Or it's not going up at a pace that Indians deserve. Right? Healthcare is this one thing where no matter what your income level is, you want the best care possible, right? So there is, I think, an immense pressure on governments, an immense line of thinking which says, let me make this cheaper now, let me make this more affordable now. But you're actually hurting yourself in the long term in a big way by doing this immediate step.
Yeah, I think this is a great segue for our next nomination. Anupam?
The next nomination comes from the distant land of West Bengal. You have an MLA from Cooch Behar who said that in his particular constituency, he's not going to allow, and I don't know how much power he has, but it's just a funny thing. He will not allow any hospital or nursing homes to charge for more than 250 rupees per consultation and more than 18,000 for the delivery of a baby using cesarean operation.
It doesn't matter what complications are there.
Oh, it doesn't matter. No. It's 18,000 and that's it.
And an elected representative decides how much a hospital and a doctor should charge.
Yeah, the elected representative knows all, doesn't he?
I think this is what happens when our politicians and our governments take a paternalistic attitude as to how much they know versus how much people who actually work in these fields know every day about something and how it should be priced, right?
Precisely. Let's just take the case of our next nomination, which is education in Gujarat, for example. The state legislative assembly has passed this new bill for private schools, that is self-funded schools, that they cannot charge more than 15,000 for primary education, about 25,000 for secondary education, and 27,000 for higher secondary education. What this essentially means is that even though there be some parents of kids who would be willing to spend more on a better quality education, will now be deprived of that. Right? So private schools will essentially cut down on all the other facilities that they provide.
Co-curricular activities.
Quality of teachers they hire, they'll try to cut costs at every single turn. So will they be providing good quality notebooks, textbooks? Will they be providing, let's say some schools even have gyms and swimming pools in their in the campuses, right? For a holistic development. You can kiss goodbye to all of that, right? And I mean, I think ultimately it will result in cutting down of wages for teachers and other essential service staff. So you'll have shortage of teachers and the entire nightmare just grows.
Or you will have all of these schools charging all kinds of fees for the textbooks, for the notebooks, for other administrative fees, other things of other sorts, and distort the entire system as well. So you'll have both happening to certain extent.
Completely, right? I mean, there are some schools which might just shut down. There might be others who are more, let's say, ingenious who will start charging a lot for complementary things. So they might, force kids to have lunch at school and then charge a bomb for it. It's easily, you can easily see this happening.
This is the sad part where the government of India wants to provide state education, does that very poorly. People go to the private sector, and the amazing thing that we've seen over the last 20 years is the poor in India spend an inordinate amount on private education. And now the government wants to come in first with the right to education, where you say, look, 25% of all private school seats, I will decide and anyone can come in. And then now you're saying that, fine, beyond that 25%, the government will also determine
how much you can charge. Exactly. Quickly moving on to the next nomination. And this is from my home state of Karnataka. I don't know if this is out of compassion. I don't know if this is to win votes. But the government of Karnataka decided in the budget, to enact a law which will prevent multiplexes and movie theaters from charging more than 200 rupees per ticket.
But why? Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't there a similar law like that in Tamil Nadu as well?
Yeah, bad policies are contagious. I thought we covered that, right? And we'll come back to Indira canteens later on. But this was Karnataka just decided that it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that its citizens are entertained. I'm not sure what that thinking is, but it said that you can't charge more than 200 rupees per ticket. And that again created a lot of distortions, higher parking fees in multiplexes, popcorn and Coca-Cola charges through the roof, and
And this also means multiplexes won't take movies that they don't think will run for a longer time or shorter windows of running movies.
Precisely. Indie movies, let's say, which cannot attract a full house, will no longer be chosen by the distributors and ultimately the theater owners, right? They will go for only those movies which have a star value, which can attract, bums on seats. If not, so ultimately that'll result in actually a death knell to the very industry that you're trying to protect.
I'm sensing a pattern in all this. The idea seems to be that we consumers are helpless, or they consumers are helpless, and the government is, in its divine wisdom, can help fend off the evil private sector, the evil corporate house, the evil company, and then step in and save them with a price control. Somebody was giving me this Rama, Sita, Ravana framework to analyze public policies and decisions of these types. So you always need a Ravana, right? You need this evil person. You have this evil company. The multiplexes are evil. Private hospitals are evil. Private schools are evil. They are the
Doctors
Ravanas
are
of the
evil.
world.
Stent manufacturers
Doctors are evil.
Stent manufacturers are evil. And then what do? You make this giant caricature of the Ravana, fill them with hay like you do in North India, right? And then you need a Sita. You need this helpless victim. You paint the picture of the helpless victim with, be it theater goers, patients, school children, whoever.
Mothers.
And the government is always Rama, right? So Rama will
The
come.
benevolent government.
Absolutely.
Who
So we
decides
do
to
have
save
Ram Rajya in that sense, a fake Ram Rajya, and somebody will fire this arrow with a little bit of fire, and this folk devil gets burnt at the stake finally, right? Literally.
Well, we wanted a Ram Raja, we got a Ram Raja.
So I'm going to use your analogy and see if it fits in perfectly with our next nomination. Probably the final one for this one, right? Which is the minimum wage code bill, which was introduced by the union government. So minimum wages, you have, construction companies, you have small factory owners, and so on, who are the Ravans. They hire these helpless, poor laborers, don't give them enough money for the end of the day, sometimes cheat them from even giving anything at all. And so thus you need the union government to step in and decide that every day you shall be given this much amount by these construction companies and so on, right? So that was the minimum wage law. And we know the consequences of minimum wages. We shouldn't go too much in detail about this, but that will create excess labor supply, not enough takers for that because of the higher wages. You'll end up with more unemployment than before.
And this is in a country where most of our employment is still informal. So you never know what the government can do about it to begin with. Women participating in the workforce, the numbers are still so low. And we have about 24 million people who are turning 18 every year, and we need to create jobs for everyone. But the idea is, let's put a minimum wage over there.
Yeah. Our next nomination has such dire impact for the whole country that I think it just deserves a category of its own.
Yes, farm loan waivers. They reared their ugly head again in 2017, right? We thought we were done with them during the Chidambaram era. For 2008, we had the last set of farm loan waivers. And we thought we had learned from that.
Apparently not. So farm loan waivers create massive distortions in the economy. And to start off with, it essentially destroys the credit culture in that particular area. What this implies is that if you keep waiving off the financial obligations of people, right, they have no incentive to ever repay again in their lives. So they can keep taking loans and they would expect that the government will step in and waive off their loans again. So,
and it's a band-aid, right? I mean, nobody wants to talk about why farmers are highly indebted. what are the causes of high debt in the farm cycle, why so many Indians are forced to be entrepreneurial farmers when there is no option to them.
Pavan, that takes effort to do all of this.
Yes. So let's put this Band-Aid.
Farm loan waiver is just easy. You just take out a Band-Aid and you put it there saying you don't have to repay your loans. And
never mind that the wound is festering inside.
Of course. And you do a farm loan instead of any structural reforms. It means that you'll need another farm loan. You'll need another Band-Aid, 5 years down the line.
It's good for the Band-Aid factory.
Absolutely.
You know that Indian agriculture deserves its own Kim Jong Il podcast by itself. But let's not get into that.
No, you need a Mao Zedong podcast for the agricultural sector.
But let's get into what happened with farm loan waivers this year. Why did it rear its ugly head again?
So the farm loan waivers was announced by two state governments. Start off in UP, and you had the BJP campaigning on that particular promise that they would do a farm loan waiver. They won. They kept up their promise. It cost the exchequer something around 36,000 crores. So that's a big fiscal deficit for a state government that really does not have too many revenue earning options. Right? So not only does it destroy credit culture, creates moral hazard, etc., it also dents the public finances massively. And of course, as I said, bad ideas are contagious. Maharashtra immediately took this upon themselves, saying, okay, we are going to do something similar. Maharashtra did a farm loan waiver that cost about 34,000 crores. Punjab came in next. They did a mini farm loan waiver. Karnataka did something and said that the union government has to basically supplement it, and the union government declined. So it's going to catch on, right? Started with UP.
And even if you want to do farm loan waivers, they can be done so differently. One of the things that could have been done in 2008, chance was lost again, is you give people the money, but don't waive off their loans. So even that exact same amount. But transactionally, this is difficult for a government to do. They can just tell the banks, waive this off, right? Because the moment you're giving money, governments don't want to do it because people who have debt are much higher than in number than those who have a debt with the banks.
Yeah.
Right? The bigger debts are with money lenders and others, and the government doesn't want to repay any of that, help pay any of that, and stay away from it. But that becomes too big, right? 34,000 crores. Yes, it's a horrible number, but you can somehow push it through. If that becomes 100,000 crores, it's a different beast. You're actually not helping the worst affected farmers.
Of course, because the poorest of the farmers have loans from money lenders and other money sharks, whereas the relatively better off are the ones who can get a bank account and then get a loan from the bank, and that is what has been waived off. This is a classic counterpoint to farm loan waivers.
Okay, folks, I think this is a rather long nomination section and a long nomination episode. So let's get to the last two sections that are remaining. Anupam, one of the other things governments do is play the old game of protecting the Indian economy from the world, where the Ravana is the rest of the world and the government is protecting all of India, which is Sita.
In India, it is the agricultural sector that is seen to be the most in need of protection from the government. So you have constant controls and restrictions on what kind of agricultural products are imported from other countries.
Exported to other countries.
So
government's playing this weird game, messing around with minimum support prices, import and export restrictions, and just ruining everything, right?
Absolutely. The number of distortions in this entire cycle is just, I think, far too many to even name. On the other hand, this is also done when there is a shortage or a drought. So constantly you have things like onion, which, there's a shortage of onions, there's a massive spike in the price of onions, and it is bought under the Essential Commodities Act, and it's not allowed to be exported. This happens about 6 times a year. So I think every year you can just put this as part of the Kim Jong Awards. So in terms of imports, this year you had, just in November, for example, I'm just going to take 1 month because it happens throughout the year. In November, you had import restrictions on masoor dal, chana dal, tur dal, and something else, right? All of this was just in 1 month. This was a 50% hike in the duty.
The last category of nominations for the Kim Jong Awards goes to this category of problems where the government, usually its role is to be an umpire, right? So you have a marketplace, you have buyers and sellers, consumers and producers. The government's job is to be an umpire, say, this is okay, this is not cool, and so on. And the government gets bored of being an umpire and decides to go bat on its own. And this is an age-old practice of running businesses, right? From Air India, which we shall not talk about, to the Mysore sandal soap factory, which because of that and sandalwood regulations, we are importing sandalwood from Australia today. And these are old ideas which refuse to die. And they've come back in 2017, right, Anupam?
Absolutely. The first nominee under this category is the government of Karnataka for starting Indira canteens.
So Indira canteens, right? A source for low-cost food for urban poor.
Yes, cooked food as opposed to ration shops which give 1 rupee and 2 rupee rice and wheat.
And why is this problematic?
Well, actually, we won't get into how Karnataka and Bangalore has a vibrant culture of darshanis and roadside vendors who do this well. There's cooked food available at various price points. Currently, frankly, I see this as a pointless exercise because 198 canteens for a city the size of Bangalore is a drop in the ocean. Right, so people are continuing to go to their pani puri walas and their adigas and their local gadis which serve rice baths. And the Indira canteen is just a drop in the ocean.
All right. What's our next nominee, Anupam?
The next nominee is the nationalization of private toilets in restaurants.
I don't even understand the rationale for this. You don't have toilets, so...
No, I don't understand this to begin with. How do you nationalize a toilet?
All right. So... in Delhi, South Delhi Municipal Corporation felt that there was not enough public toilets and the public had a grievance against it. So they just directed all private restaurants and hotels to open up their toilets for the public to use.
All of them, whoever can walk into a restaurant to use them.
Absolutely. But you have to admit it though, the South Delhi Municipal Corporation was gracious enough to allow restaurants to charge 5 rupees per usage.
So basically, your private toilets, restaurants have an obligation to serve food to paying customers who come in. Restaurants can impose a basic decency dress code and things like that while doing so, but somehow they don't own their own toilets.
No, that the toilets are public property.
I don't even want to get into how inane this is.
But maybe this is the only way to get Swachh Bharat. So this is a lazy government saying,
we cannot build toilets. We cannot provide hygienic conditions. So we're going to force restaurants to open up their toilets and make them public.
So fewer restaurants will end up having toilets as a result.
Or keep it in such a way that it's not accessible at all.
Okay. That's a good and interesting nominee. Who else is in the running?
The final nominee is from the financial sector. The BEAM app, which was launched with a lot of fanfare for making payments easier in a post-cash world, is actually built by a private consortium of banks called the NPCI, National Payments Corporation of India.
Okay.
No problem until now. But it is being promoted by the Union Government of India. So in the budget in February 2017, the Finance Ministry introduced cashback options, which they would pay out of taxpayers' money. The government introduced other kinds of incentives for people to start using this particular app. The government also mandated all government offices to start using the BEAM app. And it also said that petrol bunks and other places would soon be forced to use the BEAM app for payments.
All this is because we want to push our country into a digital age.
I'm absolutely okay with some sort of push towards digital age, but my problem is why pick one app out of, I think currently there must be at least 15 to 20 payment options.
So, hang on. The government also created something called UPI, right? The NPCI, this industry banking consortium, created the Universal Payments Interface.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that was this new thing, right? So earlier we have NEFT and RTGS to transfer money between bank accounts. And UPI was better because you could both push money to someone and pull money from someone, right? And so that was okay. Where did they go wrong?
UPI is nothing but a payment platform, so it's fine until then. But BEAM is just one app on this particular platform. There are
ICICI has its own app on the platform. Each bank has its own app.
Flipkart has its own app. right? Which is PhonePe in accordance with another bank. So there are multiple apps. Why do you have to promote one particular app?
So that's the government being the umpire, the person who creates the playground and wanting to bat on the crease.
It's partly wanting to bat, but it's also it's being partial to one particular batsman, right? It's not being neutral at all.
Okay, you guys, I have a single question at the end of all these nominations. Who wins?
We can't decide that. The listeners of the Pragati Podcast can. You can write in today to podcast@thinkpragati.com and tell us which one of these many, many nominees deserves the Kim Jong Awards. If you're not happy with our list of nominees and you think there's somebody else who deserves and who's truly worthy of promoting bad economic ideas in 2017 in India, write into us as well.
All right, thanks for coming on to the show today, Anupam, for the 2017 nominations of the Kim Jong Awards.
As I said before, it's bittersweet.
A long-dead economist called John Maynard Keynes said this very interesting thing. The ideas of economists and political philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. Indeed, the world is ruled by little else. Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influences are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. So these bad ideas that we've talked about, they've been around for longer. Practical people don't want to listen to economists today, but it's some long dead economist idea which people are trying to implement now.
एक्सक्यूज मी भैया, एक्सक्यूज मी.
बोलिए मैडम.
मेन्यू में क्या है?
मेन्यू में सीन अनसीन है, पॉडकास्ट है, ऑन कोर्स है, साइरस है, मेड इन इंडिया, रीडिस्कवरी प्रोजेक्ट, एम्पावरिंग सीरीज, सेक्स वैक्स है, आईवीएम लाइक्स है, सिंप्लीफाइड है, कीपिंग इट क्वियर है, थिंग्स एंड डेस्टिनेशंस है, माय नेबर सकरबर्ग है और द फैन गराज है. आपको क्या चाहिए?
एक बार रिपीट कर देंगे क्या?
रिपीट नहीं करता हम. आप जाओ ivmpodcast.com पे और सुनो ये सब, या फिर डाउनलोड करो उनका ऐप, सब आपकी उंगलियों पे.